Alright, so I wanted to make a video on how I would solve this problem. Just for some refresh, the question I asked was making an API call to this endpoint and getting this data. And then once you get the data, can you pull pieces of it out such that you can make a dictionary with a tuple as the key, and the uh, nation ID as the value. So essentially, we're pulling out the table ID, and then we're making or appending to that ID the population for each year, and the key will be, the value will be the nation ID. So I'm really happy to see that some of you guys took a stab at this. So if you guys want, I can go over and look at your code. It's been a second since I've looked at JavaScript, so it's gonna take me a second to kind of come up to speed on that. But I want to show you how I approach this problem. So first we need to get that. That address. So let me come back up here, and we'll get this endpoint. Okay, so with Python, if you're trying to get something, if you're trying to make a request, you want to import the request library. And make sure you spell it right. Import requests. So the first thing you can try to do is make a request to that endpoint. So let's say response is equal to request dot get, and then you're going to paste in the URL. This also takes it takes different arguments too. For example, let's put that in a string. It can take auth, right? So if you were sending something that required authorization, verify. These are all different parameters. I'll let you look at the documentation depending on what endpoint you are trying to hit. So the next thing we need to do is we need to see that response. So let's do response.json, and that's a function call. And we're going to set that equal to, let's say, data. And so now let's just make sure that we're actually getting what we want to get. We're going to print the data and see if that looks like what we'd expect it to look like. And it does. So we're getting a dictionary with a key of data and then a value of an array. And then also, I think there's another thing here. Now this, for me, this is atrocious to read. I can't read that really. So another thing you can do if you just want to have this side by side, you can import pprint as p. Oops. And then you can do it this way. And I think that would format it so that it looks a little more digestible. I still don't even really care for that too much. So there's a Chrome extension and a JSON formatter. So all I did was that same address in my URL, posted that, or populated it here and then did the search, and then the JSON formatter will automatically format it for you. So this to me is much easier to see, so we can kind of get an idea of what it is that we're looking at. You know, you have data, it's an array. You have source, it's also an array. So that's just going to make it easier for us to find and view what we need to view when making this. So we know that we have the response that's bringing back what we want. So I always like to wrap things in a function. So let's just call make tuple. We're going to put all of this inside of it. And then anytime you call a function, something I always forget to do is let's return a call to that function so that we can actually see what it is that we're doing here. So we have our data. It's returning what we want to return. So the next thing we want to do is get pieces of it out. So one of the pieces that we need is, if you come back to here, the table ID. So looking at the data, it's in it's going to be in source, position 0, annotations, table ID. So we're going to go here. We'll say table ID is equal to, and we'll say data, and this is a dictionary, so we gotta access it like such. So data, we want to access the, what did I say, the source. Let's come back here. So source, and then we want to do position 0, or I should say the index 0, and then we want to get annotations. And then we want table ID. Oops. Table ID. Okay. And then, to make sure that we have the thing that we want, let's print table ID and run that. So we're getting the thing that we want, which is great. And this is printing none because I am not returning anything from this function. So, but we know we have the table ID, and then the next thing we know is we need to get all the population datas out of each one of these pieces of data inside the array. So this each one of these is a different year. So what we need to do is say for year in data, and we want to access the data array here. So for year in data, let's print year, just to make sure that we're getting what we want. You'll see this is kind of my process is, okay, am I accessing what I want to access? So interesting. In year, for data in year. Oh, interesting. Okay, so we're actually getting the things that we want to get, which is each one of those. So we're going to say, let's make a new list here because that's ultimately what we want to do. So we're going to say table ID is actually equal to a list, and then we're going to say table ID dot append, and then we're just going to append the year at population, and let's just make sure that's right. Yeah, I think population is uppercase here, so this is kind of interesting. I think if we try to append, it's going to give us a key error. Yeah, so I think what we need to do is actually do uppercase population. Okay, yep. So that works. So then what we can do is come back down here and just make sure that we're getting what we want, table ID. So the first position, 0 index, is going to be what we want, and then we're having all the populations for each year after that. So table ID is probably not a good name for this anymore because it's no longer just the table ID, so we'll just call this something generic. And then this is a function of VS Code if you're using this as your editor. So you can see I have this listed in multiple places. So if I just come here and say my list, I'm no longer referencing it here. So what you can do instead is you can rename the symbol, and we can just call it my list, and then it's going to take every other place in your code that's referencing that and replace it with the new definition, which is really nice because for me personally, naming is just one of the hardest things. So okay, so we're printing my list, and now we got to turn my list into a tuple. So let's see, the next thing you want to do, yeah, so we want to make a tuple out of this. So we can just say my dict key is equal to tuple, which is a function, and we're going to pass it my list. And then we're going to say we want to return, the question I think is to return a a dictionary, right? Yeah, so return a dictionary. Okay, so then, whoops, what we want to do is come here, and my dict key, and we're going to say my dictionary is equal to a dictionary, and the key is my dict key, and this is going to be, let's come back and look at our data. We need to take from any one of those years in the array, we have the ID nation. So what we really need to do is for any one of those, we can say data at position data, and then index 0, because it's the first one, and then we're going to take the ID nation, and then we can say return my dict. Whoops, not my dict key, but my dict. And then that should return what it is that we need. Yeah, so that looks like what we need, right? So at the position 0, we have the what's that, ID nation, table ID, and then every other piece of tuple in that tuple is then the year, and then the key is now the ID nation. So now the other thing about this that I'm sure some of you picked up on is, well, what if this request doesn't work? And in fact, that's something I pointed out to someone else. So now let's try and wrap this in a try catch is, I think, a term used for JavaScript, but essentially it's all the same. Try catch, try except. Those are all getting at the same idea. So here we want to say try, and what we're going to try to do is make this request. So try this. If response dot okay. So if the response is okay, then we want to go through and do all this stuff. Oops. If it's not, that's where we want to say except exception has error. And I'll talk about what these things are in just a second, and then we want to print that error. So let's say in this case you're trying to wait, actually, did I do that right? Let me check my notes. Yeah, if response is okay. Yeah, so this actually not exist here yet. This needs to be, oops. This needs to be inside here. That's what. Okay, so let's say you forgot to do the URL routing correctly, and then you try to run this. It's going to catch what was wrong, and it's going to say, well, this is not a valid URL, which is really helpful for debugging if you run into errors down the road. The other thing is that this is response.ok is something you can access. Print response.ok, and then let's just do that real fast, and you can see the response is okay, right? So if it wasn't, it would return false, and you probably don't want to try and do all this on something that's false. So it'd give you an error, and then you can just escape out early on. You can also do response, I think it's response.status code, and this will tell you it's a code 200, right? So that means my call was fine. It went and it grabbed the data, no problem. I forget what they all are off the top of my head, but there's different ones that mean different things. So another way to kind of formulate your try-catch block is to try and capture all the different types of code errors, which I believe status code 400 code errors. Oops, images. So I think there's a really nice, yeah. So if you get anything in the 100s, it's an informational. Anything in the 200s is okay. 300s is a redirect. 400s is a client error, and 500s is server error. So if you wanted to capture those different types of errors, you might try something like this, and this is specific to the request library. But if you're trying to capture timeouts, or if you're trying to capture too many redirects, or if you're trying to capture just a generic, there's different types of exceptions that you want to capture, and the request library can handle all those different types of errors. So that's something to keep in mind as you're building this out. For this example, we don't necessarily need to make any sort of robust try catch, because we're just seeing, well, am I able to get the data? If I'm getting a 200, and if so, then proceed to make this tuple. But let's say, for example, that you were getting this data, making your tuple in your dictionary, and then trying to post this to somewhere else. You might have a more robust system in that code to try and capture all the different use cases for the getting and for the push, or for the posting. So please let me know if this was helpful. I can make more little videos of stuff like this that I come across at work. This was just one piece of a project that I had to work on, that was pretty large. So I think I might try and push my code to open source. So when that day comes, then I can share that and kind of go through that piece of code with you. But yeah, reach out. Let me know if you have any questions.